Today we're going to have another delve into one of Jenny's many recipe clippings books. This time I'm going to be making courgette cake, or actually as it says here, zucchini bread, except I don't have any zucchinis. This recipe must have come from one of our American friends because, well, it says zucchini instead of courgette. The other thing is it's all measured in cups. So yeah, this must be an American recipe. Jenny's made this many times. It's a really good recipe. It makes something that's kind of a cake, kind of bread. Sometimes you want a little bit of butter on it, but it's nice enough to eat on its own. I don't have any courgettes. However, I have got a butternut squash. This is one that was from our garden. This grew as a volunteer, actually. We had a really substantial crop of butternut squashes that just grew themselves from a plot where there used to be a compost bin. So I'm going to use that as a substitute in place of the courgette. Maybe the thing to do first is actually do the messy bit, which is going to be the 2 cups of grated butternut squash. You can, I believe, just eat the skin on butternut squashes, but I'm going to cut it off in this case. Look at that. I mean, considering that's something we didn't even plant, it's amazing. But yeah, I'm going to cut the skin off in this case because it's just a bit not quite so aesthetically pleasing. It's a bit scurfy and scabby in places where this grew just in amongst rocks and things. So just so you can see how I'm doing this, I'm just put the knife in there and run it down to take off a little shaving of skin. Not really sure if a potato peeler would be tough enough for the job. So that's a bit of peeled butternut squash. I reckon that will probably grate up to about 2 cups, but we've got more if we need it. I think this will probably be easier if I just chop that in half. So one thing about this is it's not as moist as courgettes. Probably will squeeze a little bit of liquid out of this, but it's a bit firmer than your average courgette. So whether that will make a difference in the cake remains to be seen. Of course, I have got a grating disc on my food processor. I could probably save myself a bit of labour with that, but who cares? Right, I think that's probably as much as I can grate without grating bits of me in there. And yeah, I reckon there's got to be at least 2 cups there. First, let's see if any juice comes out of this when we squeeze it. Oh, not a lot. Now, the problem with cup measures is it doesn't say whether that's 2 cups packed down or just loosely filled or what. So I'm going to assume it's pressed down a bit. And in order to keep my measuring cup dry, I'm just going to use this Nutella glass. They happen to be exactly the same volume. So, well, there's one. And there's the other. And I don't think it's worth trying to squeeze any juice out of this. So little came out. Perfect. 2 cups of butternut squash. Normally when I make cakes, I go for a kind of all-in-one mix. But this is not one of those. So this is where we've got to make a wet mix and then, add in the dry ingredients. So 3 eggs, 2 teaspoons of vanilla. I'm just going to eyeball that. Vanilla bean extract, that's about 2 teaspoons full. So we're going to have 2 cups of sugar in here. I'm actually going to go slightly short on that because butternut squash is a bit sweeter than courgette. So I'm going to deviate from the recipe. We're going to go for about 1.5 cups for sugar. My sugar's a bit lumpy because this kitchen is not the driest kitchen, which we will deal with in due course. Okay, so that's the sugar and the eggs. And then one more liquid ingredient. The recipe calls for vegetable oil, 1 cup of that. But again, I'm going to deviate. We're going to have proper butter. So this is real West Country butter. This is salted butter, by the way. So this actually contains salt, which the recipe calls for as a separate ingredient. And I've just melted that in the microwave. And before I chuck that into the eggs, I'm just going to check that it's not hot. So no, that's just like blood heat. And so that's a cup of butter, cup of melted butter. Right, now for the dry ingredients. 1/2 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, which happens to be pretty much what I've got left in the jar. Well, I think we might be a bit short of nutmeg there, so I'm incorporate some of the fresh. A teaspoonful of cinnamon. Huh. Which I also seem to be quite short of. Well, there's about half a teaspoonful there. And so the other deviation from the recipe is I'm just going to use some ground mixed spice, which contains cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves and a few other things. So we'll have a teaspoon of that as well. So cinnamon and ground nutmeg need to go on the shopping list. Right, 3 cups of self-raising flour. I'll sift that in. Not really sure that sifting makes that much of a difference, but some people say it makes a lighter cake. Certainly, it's not like we're sifting weevils out or anything like that. And even though this is self-raising flour, the recipe does call for 1/4 teaspoonful of baking powder. So that can go in the cup with the last cup of flour. Yeah, I mean, maybe those lumps would have ended up being little bits of dough or something. So now we need to work this into work the dry ingredients into the liquid batter. I mean, maybe I was supposed to do that 1 cup at a time, but I don't feel like it's going to matter an awful lot. Gosh, that's quite a doughy mix. Okay, we'll run with it. Could be that the butter is actually starting to solidify a little bit here because it's quite cold in this kitchen. Anyway, there we are. We have some sort of batter. I'm not going to overwork that because I don't want to make bread. I want to make a cake. And then we want 1/2 cup of chopped walnuts. That seems like about the right amount. And instead of chopped, we'll just have kind of crushed and broken. Seems about right. And then my 2 cups of grated butternut. And try and work that all together. I suppose I could add a little bit of milk here, because if this dough is insufficiently liquid, I could add a bit of milk to loosen this up. But I don't think I'll really need to. I think I'll just work it together. Yeah, I think if I'd used vegetable oil instead of butter, I think we'd have a looser batter here, but I'm sure it's going to be fine. I think the flavour of that butter instead of the vegetable oil is going to make it a nicer cake. All right, so there we go. So now I've just got to find a tin to fit that and we'll bake it. Oven is preheating because in my experience of this oven we've got in this house, it does matter. And I reckon that's about the right size tin for that. Although we've got to leave some space for rising as well. That might not be a big enough tin. Maybe that one. Yeah, I think we'll go with a bigger tin. Right, a little bit of oil inside the tin because it just helps the paper to adhere to the sides there. This bit doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm not even going to bother to line the ends. This is really just to help it to pull out or turn out after it's baked. I'll just try and get rid of these little folds in the corner because I want the cake to be inside the paper. Right, and off we go. So, and yeah, quite a claggy mix actually. I would have expected a more cake-like batter, but then it is called a bread rather than a cake. So maybe we are expecting something a bit more like a dough. Yeah, I think that was the right size tin for this. Rubber spatula time. Get everything out of the bowl. Right, let's get that down into the corners. I'm sure it will melt and flow anyway. Looks about right. Okay, that's now going to go in the oven, 180 degrees Celsius, or gas mark 5 in my case, for about an hour, but I'll probably set the timer for 45 minutes so we can check on it, just make sure it isn't burning. Right, that's now had the full hour, but I don't think it's going to be cooked in the middle. Let's just test it with a skewer. So in there, yeah, we can still see we've got some uncooked cake mix on there, so that's going to have to go back in. But that top is about as toasted as I want it to get. So I'm just going to tent it with some foil now, just to stop that top from getting any more toasted than that. Back in the oven for probably another 15 minutes, then we'll test it again. Right, total cooking time now 1 hour and 15 minutes. And Let's have a look at this now. So, yeah, there's no uncooked cake mix coming out on that skewer when I stick it in there now. Let's test it in 3 places. That looks fine. Right, so I'm not quite sure how much difference it really made putting that foil on there. Anyway, I'm going to let that cool now for about probably half an hour before we try and take it out of the tin. Okay, well, there it is. It's cooled down now. Let's slice into this and see what it's like. So I'll cut a slice in there like that. So, yeah, you can see it's got butternut squash in it. Oh, it's a very nice light cake. Okay, well, time for a taste. Oh, it's really good. Interestingly, not as moist as a courgette cake, but that's probably because the water content of courgettes is greater. But that's a really nice, fluffy, light cake. And the flavour profile is really interesting too. The nutmeg and vanilla and butternut squash combination is really, really good together. Superbly sweet without being sickly combination. I imagine using butter instead of vegetable oil also probably helped with that. Well, we're back here in the kitchen. Jenny's just come back for another slice. Jenny was tasting it actually and said it tastes like pumpkin pie, and that's the flavour I was kind of reaching to try to describe. It's the combination of the butternut squash and nutmeg, the vanilla. It tastes like pumpkin pie, doesn't it?
Yeah, really nice. I like it.
So there we go. That's what happens if you make a zucchini loaf with butternut squash instead of zucchini. I'm really happy with this cake. Tempted to have another slice right now. I hope it's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.